Hi, I'm CJ and this is my RC channel. Okay, so the first one is in. When I screwed it in, I noticed that the process of tightening the screw down to drive it in kind of locked the screw against the brass fitting. It didn't want to unscrew without unscrewing the brass fitting. So I just left it in place until the glue had fully dried, and then it was easy enough to unscrew it without driving the brass fitting back out. I may add a teeny bit more glue around the edge. I'm not sure. This definitely isn't something you want coming out, but another thing I would recommend doing is once you pull it out, when I pulled it out, it just seemed a little stiff. So what I did was I put a little more oil onto the threads of the bolt and screwed the wing bolt back in and back out again and back in and back out again, and that freed up whatever gunk may have gotten on the threads and lubricated the inside threads on the brass fitting. So good there. I went ahead and cut these basswood runners right here. These just snap into place. They slide into the square cutouts on the firewall number 2 bulkhead, and then just snap them in place up front and sand them flush once they get glued into place. The idea is to not only strengthen this edge a little bit, but it's going to provide a good surface for sanding, because when you sand the top, the canopy as it were, you don't want this flexing in and out, and then you don't get an even gap. I mean, you want this to be flush with the canopy. Also, having this makes just a stronger overall construction. So I would line this up carefully, make sure it's flush, and then just zap it with some a few drops of fast CA, thin CA. So while I was waiting on that to dry, I was kind of puttering around looking at radio stuff and figuring out what I'm going to do for receivers, and I'm still making up my mind. I got several options. Okay, this is an Orange RX 7-channel, and this is it out of its case. So this is a 4-channel Orange RX, and let me just show you the weights on these. Now, if you recall, I'm considering also adding a satellite receiver. I want to make sure that I'm getting as good a signal as possible, since I want to use this in competition. There's going to be a lot of people flying, and the area that I live in has a lot of cell towers, just a lot of RF in general, a lot of airports. And so anyway, just to show you the weight, so that's about 3 grams. I mean, that's so close, you just call it 3. Okay, now the receiver altogether weighs 12.2, but if I ditch the case and just wrap this in some electrical foil tape, which is almost like a Mylar, it'll have almost no weight whatsoever. This only weighs 5.6. So that's not a huge difference between this and this. And by using this larger receiver, I've got more antenna. I can run one of these out the side like a whisker and one upwards out of a small hole in the canopy. Orange recommends running these perpendicular to each other, in other words, like so, or in some array like that. to maximize signal. If I add the satellite, which I would mount rearward, so I could actually put it back here, and that has a total weight of 3.4 grams, and the wire is a big chunk of that. It's more than half the weight is just the wire. I wish they had thinner connecting wire for these, like these servos, but the gauge and the amount of insulation may be necessary since we're sending signal. I'm not an electrical engineer, so I couldn't say. But in any event, really not paying a huge weight penalty. I mean, the satellite is, you know, more than this 4-channel all by itself, but I'm not sure I want to rely on these little teeny antennas for in a competition setting. Oh wow, that's terrible. Okay, I'm gonna have to reshoot this section. Okay, so anyway, talking about the radio, let me just go ahead also and just do a little layout here, show you what kind of space we're talking. This turned out to be a great battery choice. It's the Nanotech 0.9 in as far as fit. No clearancing of the fuselage is going to be necessary, and compared with batteries of the same capacity, this Nanotech battery is actually quite light comparatively. So putting 2 servos in here, that's about what kind of space I've got. So that leaves a good bit of room for receiver and BEC. And the BEC I have is very small. I've got 2 that I'm kind of choosing from. One is a variable output Castle, which is a little more expensive, and the other is just a little 4 amp BEC that should do the job quite nicely. Now, if I want to use the satellite receiver, I've got to go with the 7-channel. Because this does not have telemetry also or satellite connectors. That's another reason I was considering going with this, because I have an altimeter by Spectrum, and I don't think you're allowed to use those in competitions, but I think it might come in handy as I'm learning the glider. My thought process being that you need to learn to recognize when the glider is in lift, you know, by the way it reacts, you know, kind of the way the wings, you know, want to tweak, or, you know, it kind of has every glider has its little behaviors that you can recognize that go, okay, it's into lift. But having an altimeter that gives you you know, like a increasing or decreasing tone that is, you know, sensitive and can let you know that you've immediately hit lift, that helps you, you know, visually identify, you know, okay, that's what it does when it's in lift. So for sport flying and just getting to know the plane, that might not be a bad idea. Ideally, I just want to do one setup. I don't want to be like switching receivers back and forth. I want to set it up to fly, and then not be switching things around, because, you know, I don't want to have to be rebalancing. And anyway, so let me just go over the weights again. So the 4-channel receiver is 3 grams. The 7-channel without its plastic case is another 2.6 grams. So, and then the whole package is 9 grams. So 3 versus 9, adding 6 grams up in the nose area here. Well, this will go towards the rear, but not a huge penalty, because I'm probably going to need to add some nose weight anyway just to get this to balance out on CG. I've been building the tail section as light as possible by eliminating the triangle stock that goes through the tube. The triangle stock doesn't weigh very much, but it would carry more glue with it as well. I weighed that, and I'll put that number up later before I mounted it into the fuselage, just so that if you build yours, you can compare and see where your weight's at. I'd be kind of curious to know. Anyway, it's definitely a good design as far as overall space goes. I don't think I would be, wanting any more length here. Okay, the process continues. So, now that I've bounced the camera, so the next steps are gluing on the, tacking this in place, gluing the front of the canopy in place, the part that is permanent, and basically you just section this off. I didn't use this micro saw for that. This is a little on the dull side. I used a new saw that I picked up the other day. Works very nice. Let's see, packaging. Here's the type. They come in a variety of tooth per inch. Very nice saws, nice handle, solid. And the thing I liked about this one was the height of the blade before it gets up to the stiffening portion. So, they recommend a 1000 milliamp battery. This is a 950 milliamp battery, right in the ballpark. Here's where the only place that things are a little tight is in the height. So this piece is gonna anchor in place right there, and that leaves me a little bit of space. They say to use a piece of the wing trailing edge to make a tab to go under here. I wanted to use something a little stronger. The trailing edge stock is just balsa, and the grain is going the wrong direction to make it strong. It would snap off easily, in my opinion. So I took a thin piece of scrap plywood, cut it to the width of the spacers here, and then I sanded the front of it to just wedge it up a little bit, because the further back you go, the more vertical space you get. So this is gonna slide in quite nicely. It'll go in about, maybe a 1/4 inch. There we go. It was just caught on the edge there. So it's nice and snug, so the canopy is not going to move left and right, and then it'll just glue there. So that's going to work out just fine. I'm working on the servo mounting. They recommend just gluing them in place or using some type of two-sided tape, but their preferred method is just gluing them down to the balsa. I'm considering that because these are, these servos are so inexpensive that it's not a big deal if they're permanent residents. The only thing that I see as a problem is not being able to get to this screw if I want to change the length of the horn, or what happens if I have a servo failure. I got to rip the thing out of the bottom, taking part of the wood with it and doing structural damage to the plane potentially. So I'm thinking about making a little servo tray. Basically, these will just slide in to these little slots like this, and then I'll have another little wooden block at either end that they'll anchor to, and that's No, that's fine. And then I'll have a small crossbar that just screws down on either side. I'll probably just use some of this type of plywood right here, just nice and thin, just a little strap to anchor them down, and they're not going to go anywhere. And then I can glue this piece down, and that'll make for a nice sturdy base for the servos. There's not going to be any flex issues. And that way, if I have a servo go bad, I can replace it. Or if I need to switch out a horn because the horn broke, or if I want to move the position and I want to just switch horns, just because whatever reason I need to get to this screw, there's just no way once these are glued down without punching a hole through the side of the plane, and I don't want to do that. Adding the little bit of extra wood on either side here and the top strap, I can't imagine this assembly weighs more than a couple of grams, at most a gram. I'll weigh it out for you. I'm going to go ahead and build it, and then I'll decide whether or not I'm going to use it. If I don't use it, I'll throw it away. But this is definitely an option that you might consider for your plane, as opposed to gluing the servos in place. One of the things about some of these inexpensive micro servos is that they have this plastic strap going around them that kind of holds them together, believe it or not, so you don't want to remove that, and they don't always take well to glue, and if you use like thin CA, it could potentially wick into the seams where these plates mold up and get into the servo. I mean, I guess I could use shoe glue. There's a lot of different things that could be used. Silicone sealer, just stick them in place, pin them down, and let them set with a little bit of a bead around them. But that would weigh at least as much as this. So, I think that having them in a, where I can unbolt them, and I can actually add a small center screw here on that strap so that the servos are firmly anchored in place. So I'll probably go with this. I mean, I'm going to use this for competition, but really a couple of grams plus or minus. I mean, I know some people get very fanatical about it. Anyway, we'll see. One thing I wanted to mention, and this has to do with the nose piece. There is this skid plate for the bottom, this reinforcer, and it comes right up to the edge here. I don't want to have to sand this. I think what I'm going to do is, when the time comes to mount this, I'll trim it right to the edge here. But what I'm going to do when I glue this on is I'm going to leave just enough space for the thickness of this wood, like that. So as opposed to gluing this so it's right here at the edge, and then you've got to try to smooth this plywood edge without over sanding into the softer wood in the nose piece. So something that you might want to do is, when you tack this in place, to use a piece of wood, just use this piece of wood. Maybe have a little bit of plastic in the way so it doesn't get glued in place prematurely, and that way it lines up. So just little things. And because remember, a lot of this block right here is going to get sanded away, so that should work just fine. I don't know if any you guys might know what I mean, if you've ever tried to work with plywood like this when you're sanding, when you're have it bolted, or God, when you have it glued to a soft piece of wood and you're trying to smooth this joint here where the two meet each other, the plywood is so strong and this balsa wood sands away so easy that it's almost impossible to get a nice smooth joining there. That's why I'm gonna glue this with this piece of wood as a spacer.
I hope you enjoyed this video. Please click like and please subscribe to my channel. If you click the bell icon, you'll receive notifications every time I launch a new video. Thank you for watching.